Welcome to our Boys to Men Foundation webinar on renegotiating marriage. Boys to Men Foundation is a Nigerian non-governmental organization established in November 2017 by Mrs. Ifeoma I. Idigbe. The foundation is dedicated to supporting boys and men to become their best selves and so positively impact the communities in which they live. To achieve our vision and mission, Boys to Men Foundation has developed various programs and interventions, including mentorship. The ultimate goal of Boys to Men Foundation is that males become global leaders with integrity. To quote Thomas Page McBee, we must create a culture where boys are not raised to see masculinity and humanity as mutually exclusive. We must raise the right kind of men to face the challenges of the new age and drive equity within the social structure. There must be fundamental changes to our way of thinking, being, and doing, and a change in attitudes to gender roles. This statement beautifully underscores the reason for our webinar today. The challenges of this age mean that new understandings are required in relationships and marriages. What are the new expectations of marriage and of spouses, male and female? What is to be renegotiated in this union? More and more marriages are failing, and some people, both male and female, are reluctant to even contemplate marriage because of the rigidity of traditionally defined gender roles within a modern context. What is the new psychological contract? Those unspoken expectations both men and women have of themselves within marriage. Should they be articulated and discussed? A more explicit contract? But expectations change over time as we change and as the marriage ages. So how can they all be anticipated? How should relationships be fashioned to survive the new expectations? To discuss this subject are 5 panelists. Our moderator is Mrs. Linda Madu. Linda Madu is Associate Director, Corporate Development at Nest Oil. Prior to joining Nest Oil, Linda was the Head of Corporate Services and Development at Main One Cable Company. She started her career with KPMG, Arthur Andersen, at the time, where she was a management consultant providing advisory services to clients in telecommunications, financial services, consumer markets, and oil and gas industries. Her experience spans the areas of business strategy development and implementation, organization design, business process design and improvement, and human resource transformation. Linda is on the board of Boys to Men Foundation. She is married to Pascal Madu, and they have 4 children. Mrs. Arese Ugu. Arese is a financial entrepreneur. In print, online, on-screen, and in person, Arese is leading the charge in guiding young Africans as they start their journey to financial literacy. The success of her first book, The Smart Money Woman, led her to a widely successful Pan-African book tour and spawned the Smart Money Woman television series, for which she is an executive producer. Her experience working in wealth management in Nigeria led her to build the Smart Money Africa brand, a multimedia financial education platform purpose-built to facilitate African millennials' conversations about investment, wealth, entrepreneurship, and employment that motivate young people to learn new, diverse ways to earn, keep, and grow wealth. Arese is also a co-producer and host of Business Days The Bridge, a contributor on many publications and a sought-after speaker on the continent. She serves on a number of boards and is a WIMBIS associate. Mr. Ikenna Odike. Ikenna Odike is a visionary technology entrepreneur and the founder of Outsource Solutions Nigeria Limited. He has built a diverse career in sales, business development, and customer engagement across industries, including oil and gas, logistics, and information technology. He began his career in sales and customer service at Maersk, the global shipping leader. His role expanded to include business development, relationship management, and key account management across different subsidiaries. In 2004, Ikenna founded Uconnect Telecommunication Services Limited, a successful call center management and technology outsourcing company. In 2005, with South Africa-based partners, he set up Customer Contact Solutions Nigeria Limited, rebranding as Outsource in 2017. A Microsoft partner, Outsource continues to pioneer services in cloud platform, customer engagement, BPO, and business productivity. Ikenna is married to Omomene and they have 4 children. Mr. Dapo Martins Ibidapo, fondly called Dante, is an integrated marketing communications professional with extensive experience in brand management, corporate identity development, corporate social investment, digital marketing, events management, new product development, and public relations. Dante has broad experience on local and multinational brands in the areas of aviation, banking, capital markets, food and beverages, healthcare, insurance, oil and gas, pensions, public sector, shipping, state governments, telecommunications, and tobacco. He is currently the Chief Marketing Officer at Sterling Bank PLC. Dante gained his experience working with different organizations, including positions as Head of Marketing for Wealth in Nigeria at Standard Bank for 4 years, having been the Head of Corporate Communications at the Nigerian Stock Exchange, later becoming the Head of Public Relations in the same organization. Before this, he was Head of Brand Communications and Corporate Development at Cornerstone Insurance. He has also worked as a consultant to various advertising and communications groups. He holds a professional practicing certificate in public relations and is an associate of the Institute of Direct Marketing London, the Nigerian Institute of Public Relations, and the Advertising Practitioners Council of Nigeria. Mrs. Ifeoma I. Idigwe, our host. Ifeoma Idigwe is a financial and business analyst and founder of Boys to Men Foundation. Her professional career started in banking, corporate finance, and development finance, now called SME financing. And her career has spanned banking and finance, advisory services, entrepreneurial activities in business consulting, and capacity building. She has worked in both private and public sectors and is currently focused on offering business advisory services to indigenous companies as well as life skills training. She is passionate about people development as she believes this is the obvious route to people becoming their best selves. Mrs. Idigwe is the founder and executive vice chairman of Boys to Men Foundation and is also a founding trustee of some youth, environmental, and gender-based organizations, among which is WIMBIS, Women in Management, Business, and Public Service. Ifeoma is a published author, a TV and podcast co-host, and has varied interests that include reading and writing, the collection of paintings, and objets d'art, travel, and interior and garden design. She is married to Jude and has adult children. Linda Mado, our moderator, will now take over.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. Again, I welcome you all to this webinar. We're looking forward to very rich discussions with our panelists. And just to clarify, our panelists are not marriage counselors or psychologists or even therapists. So they're not necessarily here to proffer solutions to marital problems. So rather what we want to do is to have conversations, necessary conversations for greater awareness, given what I would call changing realities, for want of a better expression. So in doing this, we recognize that we are all different people. What works for one couple may not work for the other. But a friend of mine said this afternoon, Chicks, that the implementation strategy in marriage may differ, but it is the same guiding principles, and I agree. So we want to have those conversations around those guiding principles. Each of us here should be able to take away, go away with one or two things that we can implement in our own way to make it work for our own relationships. So for the audience, just a few housekeeping rules. Please make use of the raise hand icon. I'll keep my eye on it. Drop your comments or your questions on the chat box. We have time at the end of the session. For the next hour, we're going to be having the conversations around with the panelists. And then after that, we'll take the questions. But depending on what we see coming in, we may take some of those comments or questions as we move along. Ikena, we can hear you. So that's what we are going to do as the session goes on. So to start the conversation, we know that people change, situations change, particularly in marriages, in any relationship for that matter. So Arese, I'm going to start with you. Before we go into how we manage these changes, let us talk a bit about what has changed. What are those things changing? What are the new expectations? What are the changes that we expect couples to see? You know, what was normal or expected in the past decades in terms of gender roles? That's what we are talking about. That is different today. So Arese, over to you, and I'll go around the other panelists as well, but please beginning with Arese. Arese, you have the floor. Please talk to us about the changes.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you started with we're not marriage counselors, because I'm most certainly not a marriage counselor. I'm divorced, so I have a unique perspective on the whole marriage thing. I think for me, what I've observed that is changing is that in the older generation, we put more of the onus for a marriage working on the woman. And we spent so much time raising girls to be virtuous, to be industrious, to be humble, to be the most amazing versions of themselves. But I don't think that we spend enough time making a similar investment in boys. So what happens is these virtuous women grow up and they're ready to get married, and then there are men who have never had to abide to the same rules that the women have had to abide by. So for example, when a mother is raising her teenage daughters, she's telling them, we don't want to see boyfriend, we don't want to, we don't talk to boys, don't do this. And then at 20 something, they're saying, oh, where's your husband? What's happening? But with boys, they have more of a leeway, where I've seen many times where mothers look at their daughters and say, don't do this and don't do that. But then their sons bring home numerous girlfriends and they're praising them like, you are amazing, hey, you are a man, is fantastic. And then we think that it's a mistake when they get married and then cheating becomes normal. I think that what is changing is the younger generation women are less inclined to accept certain things. So if you're emotionally abusing me, if you're financially abusing me, if you are cheating, if there's issues with infidelity and it's constant, they're less inclined to say, let me stay here, right? And I want to say our parents' generation was more of the school of thought of, it doesn't matter, manage, it will get better and all of that. But these days, women are more about, wait, hold on, I'm going to try to make this work, but if the other person is not putting in, as much effort, how long should my life be a symbol of suffering as opposed to, thriving like everyone else? So I think, in my own opinion, that is what is changing.
Thank you very much, Arese. So you see that just in summary, that women are less inclined to accept what the older women would ordinarily condone. So you see that changing. The women are speaking up a bit more and not ready to take some of those.
Maybe we should call them inconsistencies.
Inconsistencies in the other gender. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you very much for that contribution. Dapo, you're going to go next. Dapo, please, let's know what, from your own opinion, what you think the new expectations are.
Okay, good afternoon. For me, I think the expectations aren't for me to say, because they vary from individual to individual and from couple to couple. And if you want to go deep into expectations, there are quite a lot of them. And I wouldn't go granularly into my expectation, Arese's expectation, Kenna's expectation, or your expectation. it would be the buckets of expectations. So there's expectation of the couple, one bucket, individual expectations of each member of that unit, another
That's
bucket.
fine. Okay.
Expectation from the family of the lady and of the guy, and then societal expectations, which puts a lot of pressure on us. Arisa spoke to some of that earlier on. And for me, the primary challenge is when there's a mismatch of expectations. That's when the problem starts. If those expectations can be properly aligned from the beginning, there's not a guarantee that it would work out as planned, but it helps to reduce the amount of issues you would face and help reduce how rocky the road forward is.
All right. Thank you, Dapo. So you're talking generally about the various, the types of expectations that one would expect on the individual level, different expectations for the couples. And I think when you talk about the couple, the individuals that make up that couple, that the expectations need to be aligned. And when they're not aligned, we tend to have these issues. And you did mention that we also have expectations of families and in-laws, and of course the society as well. Thank you very much for that. Ikenna, you're next. Please share with us, you're still on mute. Ikenna, please unmute and talk to us about what you see as the changes that we tend to see these days or with these recent generations.
Okay, and thank you very much, Linda, and good afternoon, everyone. For me, I think that Arase and Dakoro have touched on very important areas. I want to talk about the role of the father in the marriage, or in marriage, I should say. So when I was growing up, for example, my dad would never give me a hug or tell me I love you. That was something that was seen as very alien. And so I think that in today's family, the role of a man has evolved. So the man essentially has to spend more time with the children, be part of rearing the children. In the past, it was really more of the women that role was left to. But now you find that a lot of men, whether knowingly or unknowingly, are becoming better at being a part of their children's lives, and translating that into easing the burden of rearing the children, from the mother or from the wife. So, and then on the side of the women, you also see that more women are understanding that they have to contribute to the upkeep of a family. I think that what is important is that a conversation needs to be had around who does what and when. So in a family, for example, where both the wife and the husband are earning very good money, okay? So money is no longer an issue there. What else? What happens when there are decisions to be made? Who makes those decisions? So decision making is another area. I think that is something that is evolving, and men are involving their wives more often in decision making. I think that's one very critical area that we tend to neglect as well, is who makes decisions in the household and why and for what. Okay, so I think looking at those areas, for example, the role of a man in making a decision, the role of a woman in making a decision, who decides where the children will go to school, who decides what sort of school fees that should be paid, and so on and so forth. I mean, in the past, that was traditionally just the man, because he was the one paying the bills. But that has changed. And so I think that the men are beginning to accept and adopt dialogue when it comes to those sort of decision making in the family. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Ikenna. And it was quite interesting talking about how the role of the father has evolved. With that, beautiful story about your father, which really I would say was common in those days. But it goes back to what we heard in the introduction. The person who introduced talked about the quote from Thomas Page Maccabee, where that we must create a culture where boys are not raised to see masculinity and humanity as mutually exclusive. So in the past, it appeared that being masculine meant you couldn't be human. But now we are beginning to see that you're being masculine, or your masculinity shouldn't stop your humanity from showing forth. Thank you very much for that. And we'll talk some more about the decision making and all of the other matters that you raised as we move on. But just as we're still trying to set the context, Mrs. Sidigbe, I'm going to come to you now for your, what I'll call your opening remarks on the topic that we're talking about at the expectation level, change in gender roles. Ms. Sidigbe.
Okay, good evening or good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I think that the way that girls are raised has changed slightly. What Arisa talked about in terms of humility and all of that applies. But more than that, mothers raising girls now recognize the need to raise tough women. And it's actually becoming a bit of a problem because they're raised to know that it's a man's world, and therefore you have to work extra hard to achieve what you want to achieve, work extra hard in school. And so the girls are now topping the classes. And when you leave school and you're educated and you go into the workplace and you get a good job, you're very unlikely to be subservient. And it doesn't matter how much your mother has taught you about humility, because you will define humility and you'll define subservience. And you know that that subservience is not letting somebody walk all over you. And so you're going to then want to marry a man who lets you be the best you can be. But it's not always easy to identify a man who lets you be the best you can be, because he can masquerade as if he's going to do it. And then once you're married, he starts giving you the rules, because men have not come along, in spite of what Ikenna said, which is very true. But that's for a few men. They haven't come as far along changing mindsets and attitudes as the women have, because they don't have to. Privilege is its own worst enemy. It doesn't force you to change anything. And the roles we even define for men and women, who defines them? We say society defines them. Who is society? It's us. It's we, men and women. And so if we can't change it, it means that there's a group that doesn't want it changed. And that therefore maybe that those changes have to be forced or helped along. And so when women get into marriage now, there are a couple of things going on in their heads. They keep an open mind, first of all, and see how it's going. And then along the way, they begin to determine what exactly is this man about and how is he going. And that begins to influence their decisions. And then resentments and what I'll call autistic hostility begin to arise, because you see, there are things people do. You can't tell them you don't like it for the sake of peace. But it doesn't go away, and it begins to influence your behavior. And so increasingly that is happening because women are not accepting the status quo. And what is more, I think for me, the whole idea of a psychological contract, what we're talking about, those expectations, we don't actually verbalize them. It's like when you get married, this won't change. You expect your husband to give you food money, whether you're going to pay rent or not, or pay school fees. There's something about him providing that makes you feel, yes, he's a man. You know, women may complain about taking up additional roles these days, but they also don't recognize that sometimes there's a resentment. So women also have to change their mindset. I think for any of these expectations to be realized, both men and women need to change their mindsets, which means that perhaps the psychological contracts has to be defined very clearly in conversations. And I believe that the other people have spoken about that, because and also those expectations change with marriage. I've been married for a long time. My expectations when I first got married, my expectations when I started having children, and my expectations now that my children have left the house, they've all changed. They've all changed, you know. So really, you know, in the middle years when you're having children, and this is something that Ikenna alluded to at some point, you're so caught up with the children, you may not have that much time for your husband, and so his companionship may not be a priority for you. But when the children have left the house, you need to have that companionship. And so that expectation from him will change. And I think we need to recognize that what you wanted at the beginning may change throughout the course of the marriage, and that you yourself need to change in order for that marriage to survive. It's not stay as you are and the other person change. Both parties have to keep evolving and changing for marriage to last.
So, thank you very much, Mrs. Sidigbe, for those words of wisdom. In summary, I would say, yes, the expectations are changing. The expectations keep changing, even for an individual. What the expectations were at the beginning of the marriage, for example, is different from what it is in the middle and maybe what it is later on in the years. So the idea is to work around those expectations and continue to manage them. You also talked about how differently girls are being raised today. So they are raised to work extra hard. They are raised to, fathers send their daughters to the best schools and expect that, like you would say, there will be CEOs and very top people, working in the corporate world. Those have their implications. Before we go into that in detail, I'm going to come back to you on the concept of hypergamy and hypogamy. And just so we are all on the same page, hypergamy being the act of marrying someone who is in a higher economic class or higher social class than the other. And traditionally, that's what men tend to do because the women were generally at a lower economic level. So the men tended to marry downwards, that's hypogamy. And while the women married upwards, because that's what was available, they married the men who were generally on a higher economic or social status. Now, it appears that is changing, and therefore, the question is to you, what challenges does that change bring? First of all, do you even agree that men are beginning to marry upwards, even if not as often as women do? What do you think about that, and what are the challenges that come with it?
Okay. First of all, I think men are beginning to have sense nowadays, more sense. It's not a new development. It's something that's always happened in the past. The only thing is, traditionally, I'd assume that it would be more of the influence of the family of the man determining him marrying up or him marrying down. Even in other climes, up until last 20, 30 years, in the royal family, there's only so low you can marry and so high you can marry. But to your earlier point, where we live and where we're from in Nigeria, there were more people marrying down because of that patriarchal, the man must be the one with the power. And whoever had financial power in those days was the person seen as. You'd see marriages where the woman would come from a wealthy home, and upon marrying someone who was less affluent than she was, everything her father owns becomes his, and then the power to go back to him. And before now, I've been at conversations, some 15, 20 years ago, where people would be like, oh, you can't marry someone whose parents have more money than you, that you become a slave, they will ride you in quotes. And all of that, I think, come from some ego that needs to be soothed or massaged somewhere. But the way we live in now, from the last 5 to 10 years, you see a lot of men who are now coming to the realization that, if I'm okay with this person and I'm comfortable with this person, the issue of, how comfortable she is or her family is doesn't matter much on one side. On the other side, you have the hunters who basically are like, I will marry up. Colin Powell, the former US, what's it called? Very clearly that he was raised to learn to marry up. It was like a prerequisite in family. You need to marry up. I think a lot of boys in Nigeria now are marrying up. It's almost like an in thing now. So what you see is it's like a compliment to the young man's ego. That instead of 6 friends, you can't be the only one to now not marry up. This has come from a combination of people having gone through different things over the last few years, people basically having experienced some level of financial hardship, and understanding from the family, you need to do things differently. Now, how does that change the power dynamics in the house? That's a totally different conversation. Because where I think there's a challenge is where you want to marry up, and at the same time, you want to still do the whole "I'm the man of the house" in quotes when the money is coming from the lady. I'll mention this as we go further on, but I think that if the woman contributes 70 to 80% of the income in the house, and you contribute only 20 to 30%, it's a lack of common sense to now assume that you would have 70% of the power in the house. It makes no sense. You know, if I contribute 2 million a month to the house, I expect to get value for 2 million from my partner. And if she contributes 5 million a month to the house, she also should expect to get 5 million of value from that relationship. Once it's not, I can consider and say, look, you know, I contribute 5 million a month, but you know, I can get 3 million in value. That's fine. But once the value realization is not commensurate, you have a big problem. And that's why I think a lot of women are finding it hard. They grew up in houses where the fathers and mothers were like, this is the role of the man. But you've married up and you still want to maintain those role of the man. You still want to do that whole dominate, you know, and the different books of religion also tell us, you know, in their own different skewed ways that speak to different things, what a woman should do, and people interpret this in ways best known to them just to make it suit their agenda. And that constant flux, you know, disconnect between new realities, how much the woman is helping, and not just about money, by the way. It's also about how much effort she puts into it. So it's a long conversation. I'm sure before we finish the session, Kenna, Arase, and Mrs. Digby would throw a lot more color and context into the power play dynamics of that in the home front. So
thank you so much, Dr.
I mean, the part of it, yes.
Yes, no, thank you. That was very useful. I think part of what I take out from it, I took out a lot, but part of it is saying you can't have your cake and eat it. If you're going to marry upwards, it comes with certain challenges, and you need to be able to manage that. You need to be able to live with that and give that value, or lose that value that would have ordinarily been yours if you were the one up. Okay, thank you very much.
Can I add something, Linda? Can I just add something? You know, I find the whole idea of this marrying up and marrying down interesting, because we tend to concentrate on it in terms of economic terms. You did mention social status, but you see, sometimes a man marries within his social status, but economically up. In which case, as far as he's concerned, nothing has changed. You see, if he's married, if, for example, a woman marries a man who is beneath her socially, okay, but he may have more money than her, it's a different dynamic. It's a totally different dynamic, you know, because he has the money, but he's marrying her for the polish he wants for his children. And so again, it leads us to the expectations of marriage, because sometimes a man who has made the money but is not educated will marry a heavily, seriously educated woman from a really good family because he wants his children to be like her. And that happens. But you see, when that happens as well, like Dr. said, he may be a very traditional person. And so that interferes with his aim. It still influences the way he addresses things, and then therefore his children will still pick up on it. So that thing that he wanted, he may not entirely achieve it, because what he is and where he's coming from is superseding those things. And it's just a thought that I thought to throw in.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you very much for that. And just as you were speaking, I think I want to talk a bit more about women with careers. You know, because today we see more and more women, at least compared to some 10, 20 or 30 years ago, more and more women with the demands of the careers, especially when it comes to seniority, because when you are working in a place and you're getting all of those promotions, there are demands that come with them. How do we prepare couples to manage this reality, whether or not the man is on is the one up or down, but just with that change, how do you prepare couples these days to see that as the reality and manage it? Are you asking a specific question?
Oh, you're asking me how do you prepare? I think that for me, first of all, I've always felt that mindset is the beginning of changing attitude and influencing behavior. And so if life is changing, and if we take it that everything that we do, the roles and the rules defined by society are a social construct, and so we can deconstruct those rules and those roles as well, because those rules and roles came about as a consequence of circumstances and events. For example, after the Second World War, during the Second World War, women had to step into a lot of roles that men had before, and after that, you couldn't say to them, go back, and they continued to work. And so I think it's important that all of us, men and women, have the mindset that change is the order of the day. And that what is important is that we allow that the best person for the job should do it. And if you recall, there was a poem that I in my book that said that our minds make what they will of circumstances. Social constructs, man-made roles and rules order our lives. We get it wrong, striving to get it right. Let each, male and female, labor as one. Life a shared cause. Let old mindsets holding sway give way. Roles defined by need, by circumstance, not by gender. And I think if we begin to think that, okay, if my wife has the better job, and in many instances these days, a man and a woman may be working in the same organization, and then they say only one can stay there. It makes sense for the better person to retain the job. And so if it's the woman, she retains her job. That means that the responsibilities that she has, and which means that while he doesn't have a job, the domestic role then, looking after the children, picking them up from school, doing their homework with them, must be a role he must now embrace. Ikenna talked about that the modern man these days is looking and doing some of these things, but then he has to do it without resentment. And she also has to bring the money without resentment. And that is where the problem lies. Therein lies the rub, that they may do these things, but there's a slight resentment that this is not the role defined by society. So we're all hidebound by these roles and these rules of society. We forget we are society and that we ourselves need to do those changes. And it is within our families to begin to make those changes. Look at Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her husband. Her husband understood his wife didn't cook well, that hers was ambition, and he supported her ambition and looked after the children and cooked better than herself. So that even when they entertained, he was the one who did the cooking, and it was okay with him. He was happy for his wife to do well. And she was very proud of him for taking away that responsibility so that she, who had the greater ambition, could push forward. That's about partnership. If marriage is a partnership, then it means that our defined roles have to be flexible. They have to be flexible, and that we have to get rid of resentments that are associated with changing roles or role reversals.
Well, that's interesting. Thank you very much, Mrs. Sidibe. So it's a social construct that changes the order, and we just have to embrace that. So in partnerships, like marriage is a partnership, we should concentrate on giftedness, not the gender. So not the roles defined by the gender, but what the other person is, what the person is good at, and focus on that. That's really interesting. And that mind is study I ran into. We're preparing for this webinar, the millennials, younger generation. What was identified as that contributed the most to happiness of the family members was flexibility in marital roles. So they liked that it was dynamic. They liked that it wasn't rigid. It wasn't as defined by the society or tradition. They were happy to have the roles fluid. Great point. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to come to you. We've talked about money, and I know this is right down your alley. So we'll talk about finances now. In the new realities, who does what? If the female, for example, earns more and her job comes with a house, do they move to the house? Who pays the school fees, the rent, and all of those things? Holiday expenses. How are these expenses, apportioned? What's your view on that? Money matters, Arese.
Okay, so in general, I don't like to say, oh, this is how a couple should manage their money, or this is how they should make decisions, because like Dapo said, every couple is different and people make decisions differently. But what I do like to talk about is, or are the things that I feel like every couple should discuss before they make the commitments to, be married. One thing that really stands out to me, or that stood out to me a few years ago, was Mrs. Awoshika saying that one of the most important decisions you're going to make in your life is your choice of partner, and it can either make or break you. And that in Africa we don't spend enough time telling girls or women that they should find their purpose first and know who they are first before they get into a marriage. And she gave an example of how, as the chairman of a bank, right, she's not going to, and even as someone who was running a huge business like prior to that, she was never going to come home at 5 o'clock to make food, put food on the table at 5, or have dinner ready in the traditional sense of things. But she would organize for food to be made, for the family to have food. And I think that is an important thing, because if the person that you pick as your partner is not aligned with your purpose, right, it causes problems. So somebody who knows this is what this woman does, or this is what this man does, and these are the adjustments I'm going to have to make in terms of who has what role, is extremely important. And we can't know all those things if we don't know what our purpose is. I find that the biggest financial problems in a marriage come at the beginning, when two people are not sure who they are yet, and then they come into a partnership. It causes problems. Second thing is, I feel like we don't have enough conversations about money. And it sounds very transactional, but the reality is money is sort of at the core of a lot of things that we do, right? So things as simple as, what does your partner see as a luxury? So things as simple as generator, right? Should the generator be on? If NEPA takes light, should it be on for 4 hours, or should it be on till the next morning when everybody goes to work? If you marry somebody that does not believe in putting on a generator all night, it sounds like a simple thing, but that's a money issue, because they don't want to burn that kind of money on diesel for the whole night. But you see that as a comfort, right? And is a basic, need. We don't have enough of those conversations before we get into a marriage. We don't spend enough time thinking about, especially women, I think, we don't spend enough time like really paying attention to how does a person behave in a financial crisis. So not just what they say with their mouth, how do they behave? If they're owing people and they're being called constantly, do they sink or do they swim? How do they make decisions when it comes to their finances? If they're under a lot of pressure, if something monumental happens, how are they likely to handle it? Do they have to borrow money to solve the problem, or do they figure out another income stream? Are they risk takers? So in terms of like investing as well, you might be a conservative, investor. The other person might be a high risk investor bordering on gambler. And they can say, oh, you want to pay all your bills, your children's school fees and everything. But maybe the person is a gambler and they're like, oh, I'm going to use this money for school fees to invest in the stock market, and then the money goes away and you're like shocked. But these are all money conversations that I feel like people should have. How does your partner handle debt? How do they handle a crisis? How do they view living expenses? What is a luxury? What is basic? We make a lot of assumptions about these things because we assume that everybody thinks that we think, but we all have different backgrounds, different experiences. So that informs the way that we make decisions. And when you don't pay attention to those differences or have conversations about scenario planning, like, so for example, if this happens, what are you going to do? Or what do we do when there's a conflict in this area of our lives or in this area of our finances? I just feel like men and women have to have more honest conversations about these things so that people are not entering into marriages and they don't really know who they're marrying.
Okay. So thank you, Areset. So in essence, there's no magic wand. It's what people just have to figure out what works for them. But we take the point that whatever it is, as transactional or almost mercenary as it may sound, it's very important to have these conversations. My question really is, at what point then do you have these conversations? Again, given that we've talked about the expectations changing and all of these realities changing from day to day, when do we now have this conversation? Is it a continuous thing? How does it work exactly?
I think it's important for you to have it before you get into a union. But I think that this is, like Mrs. Idiwe said, people evolve. The person that you marry at 20 something is not the same person at 30 something. We evolve as people. So I think that the conversation is important to have before lifetime, but it's also important to continuously be having conversations in the marriage, because people evolve and things change and attitudes change. So it's important to continuously have it.
Okay, so thank you very much. And I'm going to come back to you when I finish with when Ikenna speaks. I'm going to come back to you on the place of communication in marriage, because you've touched on it and why it is important. Thank you for that contribution. Ikenna, coming to you now, we're going to talk about children or family, that role of managing the home and career. What are these sacrifices that need to be made? Because there are sacrifices. Who makes them? And as I ask this question, what occurs to me is what I read. I must have been the last person to read Barack Obama's The Audacity of Hope. I read it recently. I listened to it recently. It was an audiobook. That's the only way I get by these days. But what struck me is a part where he talked about how he thought he was a very supportive partner. And I really think he's a very supportive partner. Maybe because he lives on the other side of the world, but there are very casual conversations about him doing the dishes, him looking after the girls, picking out their clothes and all of those things. So yes, he's really quite involved. But he was able to note that really when it came to making those sacrifices, it was his wife, Michelle, who had to call to cancel meetings when maybe a child is ill, who had to call to change her plans, and she did more of it. So for him, the sacrifices, many of the sacrifices were made by his wife, Michelle, sometimes at the expense of her career. And this was before he became president, really. It was long before that. So what do you make of that? What are your own thoughts around those sacrifices and how they should be managed?
So I think that, thank you once again, Linda. I think that there is a foundation that has to be in place before a sacrifice can be made. And that foundation has to come from a place that has trust and a place that has love. Now, when I say love, I don't mean romantic love. I don't mean erotic love. I mean agape love. Because for you to be able to be selfless, so less of yourself in a marriage, in a union, then you have to have trust in the relationship that you have. You have to have love, that love that allows you to be able to sacrifice, sort of like the kind of love that Christ had for us when he came and he died on the cross. That is the foundation. So it is difficult for you, if you don't have this foundation, to be able to truly sacrifice. So what you talked about, who's going to cancel what? So for example, the husband and the wife are at work. The school calls, oh, the child is sick. Who rushes to this? Is the father saying, oh, you're the woman, go quickly? Or do you have an honest conversation to say, what is your calendar looking like today? Okay. Do you have anything that you can get out of And so which of us should go quickly and rush we got a call, for example, and then my wife and I end up being at the school at the same time, for example, right? And then so right there and then you have a conversation about who can stay, okay, and who can go back to the office. Again, it depends on the mutual understanding that exists. It depends on the communication level that exists. And it's so, I go back to my statement about that foundation. It's very key to have that foundation. And that foundation is built from being able to communicate freely with one another. And truly, I'm not saying that, so this is, I'm not giving, how do I put it now? I'm not trying to teach. I'm just trying to say that this is a prerequisite. Yes, this is a prerequisite really for you to be able to make a sacrifice. And so, and then also, whose career should we push forward first? I have a cousin who's in Canada at the moment. And so he was working at a bank, and then he quit his job because he got admission to go and do his master's. And then so he went with his family, right? And the wife also had to quit her job. She was working in a bank as well. But they had a very frank conversation about this decision. So he didn't just say to her, listen, this is happening in my life and I need to do it and I need you to come along. They talked about it and I said, okay, where do we want to be 5 years from now? Okay. And so whose career should come first at this moment? And then I agreed that, okay, his career should come first right now. And then after the graduation and once he gets a job, right, she will go back to school herself as well, get her own master's degree. And then so there is communication and there's planning. And so when you're making a sacrifice as a spouse, there's an expectation that when it comes to your turn, your spouse will also be in a position to make some sacrifices for you. But again, like I said, that foundation has to be there. Otherwise, one person ends up being the one who's always sacrificing. And of course, we all know, I mean, in our society, in the past, really, it was mostly women who sacrificed, mostly. I'm not saying that was, 100% the case, but mostly. And then it was assumed, right, that, they'll come into a family and then the man always had priority. But that is changing. And one thing I wanted to quickly talk about as well is that the homes that we come from plays a very big role in how we see marriage.
Yes, that's right.
So me, for example, growing up, for many years, my mom worked in a bank for more than 30 years. And she was the last person to come home. My dad always came home, room or watching TV or something. But my mom would come home sometimes 8 p.m., 9 p.m. It was routine. And so that mindset that one, a woman obviously has to work or chooses to work. And two, her work makes her come home late is not a big issue. You could actually be able to work with that as a man or as a spouse. Okay, so that mindset already is there. So whether I choose to or not, it's somewhere there, and basically I learned from it. And so, when you're getting married, the assumption for me was that my wife was going to work when I was getting married. Now, did we have a conversation about it? No, we didn't. Thank God, at least, she also had the mindset that she was going to work from day one. So it is important then to say, okay, both of you are going to work, right? So let us agree. And I think going back to what Aressa said about talking about money from time to time, I think that everything that concerns marriage, every aspect of marriage, it should be discussed at intervals. We have to have discussions with our spouses, parenting, be it our sexual life, be it religion. There has to be, and those discussions have to be deliberate. It's not happenstance. They have to be deliberate. So you choose a time and a place and you have those conversations. So much like the way that organizations do retreats, do what do you call it?
Strategy sessions and all.
They have a goal, and so on and so forth. I think that we should approach marriage that's for success, right? Is that you are deliberate about what you do. It cannot be happenstance. It cannot be, fly by pants. There has to be a deliberate attempt to achieve success. And so, what is that deliberate attempt? I mean, think about it. If you want to be a doctor, you don't just fall into being a doctor. You have to go to school for nearly 8 years, right? And get your medical degree before, and then you go and you do a housemanship, and you learn how to be a doctor before you even start treating patients. But we all thrown into marriage. No, I mean, there's no school that we go to learn how to be good husbands and good wives, for example. Okay, before you get married, you get, I don't know, maybe if you're Catholic, you get 6 months of what they call marriage counseling, and by the time by the day of the wedding, you probably have forgotten most of what was discussed at the marriage council. So I think it's important that there is a deliberate plan to discuss every area of marriage. Thank you.
Yes, so thank you so much, Ikenna. And as you were speaking, some of the attendees were agreeing with you. I haven't been doing a good job of reading those comments, but I want to take these two. Emmanuel Echo says that the foundation of the marriage, that's agape love and understanding, and upbringing plays a key role, in determining who makes what sacrifice and for how long. And we must be deliberate about having such conversations on an ongoing basis. So that's agreeing with you, really, about the need to be intentional about these things and have deliberate conversations. Yemisi Ayeni also agrees. She says, be deliberate, strategic, have retreats, do not leave it to chance. Very well said, Ikenna. Yes. Thank you so much for that contribution. And for the other panelists too, if you want to add to that, please feel free to. And while you are coming up with what you want to say, Aresa, I'm going to come back to you. I know I saw that I was going to come back on communication, but I think Ikenna has talked a lot about it already. So I would talk about, because as he speaks on, the sacrifices can be made by anyone. It's about knowing who it works for and all of that. There's this notion, and we sometimes know it, that the women may not even be ready to accept the men as their equals when it comes to this care for children, for example. Where they think that they are the ones that have to do it and can do it and do it. Work mobility, because it's a necessary thing. There are troubles and postings that come with the jobs that women are having these days. How do they impact on family life? Are women really willing to make such impact on family life? What do you think about it, Arese?
I think that both women and men, like we said earlier, is changing the way that they're approaching marriage, especially I think in the younger generation. I think there's this idea that when a woman starts making more than her husband, she now becomes proud and she doesn't want to be subservient, anymore. But I don't know. I found that has not been my experience. I've not met any woman who is even marginally successful who does not want to feel looked after by her partner. And I think women tend to make more of the sacrifices in the home, and we tend to want to do it all, like more than the men. So a woman will be working in her career, she has all the demands and the pressures from her job, but she still doesn't want to be seen as a bad mother. She wants to be the one that does school runs, that make sure that the kids have everything that they need and all of that stuff. But as we found, is not really realistic. Like Ikenna said, it's important for people to have conversations about who should do what when, who, given our specific circumstances now, who is better suited to do certain things. So if it's school runs, if it's making sure that there's dinner for the kids at the end of the day, that sort of thing. But I think that women, especially Nigerian women, want to do all of it. And we beat ourselves up for not being able to do all of it, right? So you want to be the best mother, you want to be the best wife, you want to be the best person in your organization. But I think you're right, we have to start learning that we can't do it all. And it's important for us to be in partnerships that allow us to thrive individually. And, you know, a partner that will look at you and say, listen, actually, honey, you cannot do everything by yourself. Like some things, leave something, let's make arrangements for some things to be done by other people, for us to delegate some of these tasks so that you're not burnt out. So yeah, I think it's an important conversation that women need to have about not always wanting to take it all on because they want to be the best, seen as the best, you know, mother or wife and career woman.
But in doing that, how do they manage? How do they manage the outcomes? So, because I know even in roles that would mean they're uprooting their families and moving, for example, you know, so they don't even think about it. They just assume that this is not for me. But the other way around, it's very easy. It will go, or you know. So, what do you think about that? Is this something you think women should be encouraged to explore?
Sorry, I didn't get that. Something.
You know, we're talking about work mobility. And I was given an example from my own experience, what I see with working in teams, that when it comes to making a move that would make an impact on the entire family, the women tend to opt out. Even if it's going to be a much better opportunity, even if it's going to mean increased role, or like as a recognition of good job done, but just not even thinking about, it's not going to be possible. I can't move my family, for example. I don't expect my family to move or change their entire location just because of me. But for the men, I see that that's not a problem at all. You know, if they have to move, they move. If they have to do anything, go do it. What do you think about it?
I don't know, that one is a tough one because it depends. It depends on the particular marriage. I find that when it comes to big decisions like that, the marriages that I know that are thriving think about their marriage partnership. So if moving is going to be better for the family because it's going to give us a more successful life as a family, then that's what they'll do. But if you are struggling with the new age thinking and the traditional roles or ideals that, you know, we have as a society, it might be difficult because even if the man might know that the woman is earning more or this will put them, you know, in a better situation, he might feel some type of way about having to uproot his own life for a woman, right? But I think that to a large extent, I think that again, in more like millennial marriages, that is kind of changing because women are now seeing themselves as individuals as opposed to, which I think is important because I don't know, when I was younger, like the idea was you're not a complete woman until you're married, right? And you think about everything in terms of the union as opposed to yourself, which is great, but I think that it's important for us to start encouraging women to know who they are and be individual, so that the idea is you're an individual, I'm an individual, we come together and we create value that's bigger than if we were doing it by ourselves. So I feel like if you have that sort of, you know, mindset where this person is an individual and because I love them, like Ikena said, I think that making decisions from a point of love, right? Because I love this person and I want them to do well and I want us to do well. If you're thinking about it from that point of view, if you're thinking about your marriage from a partnership point of view, where whatever decision, whether it means moving abroad or taking a job in another, you know, city, whatever decision is best for the partnership, I think is what people should, you know, both parties should look at.
Thank you very much, Arese. And I know Dapa wants to say something about the love. Dapa, I'll come to you shortly. But Mrs. Bickerstead has made a very valid point on communication. She talked about the time of the communication, you know, the mood, the time of the day, the place, etc. clearly, sometimes when and how you communicate may even be more important than what is being communicated. So it's important to read that. Thank you very much, Mrs. Bickerstead, for that point. Dapo, please go ahead and talk about the, you want to say something about agape love?
Yes, please. So what I kind of noticed is, and I'm speaking for myself and just a few people that I know, not for everyone, is that we love to hold on to concepts that we do not have a clear grasp of. And for sentimental reasons, I'm not going to go into detail of those concepts, but part of when we say agape love, for example, it means nothing to me. But to a lot of people, they want to hold on to something. If it works for you, fine. Now, a lot of research has been done about why and how marriages are kept together and marriages that have worked. And my feedback on this is, if religion is the most important thing to you, then fine. But we need to do a bit more research to understand that what matters first of all are the individuals, not your faith, not your family, not your religion. You must put yourself first. The researches that have been done over the years show that having shared interests comes top of the list. Almost 70% of marriages that actually work. Surprisingly, what comes next, about 65% or thereabout, were satisfying sexual relationships. And a lot of times we don't discuss these things ahead of marriages. You don't get to hear about it on marriage counseling. It's extremely important, satisfying sexual relationships. And what comes third in this research, about 61 or 62%, were sharing household duties, which, Linda spoke about Obama, Barack doing some of the house work, helping Michelle. Those things are so important. And in Africa, Nigeria particularly, we do not discuss this. You see mothers, new age mothers, in 2020, where when the girl was 14, 15, she was made to do things in the kitchen, cook for the house. And the boy is 16 and she's like, no, he can't cook. Why can't he cook? Mm-hmm. We leave all those things to the side. And then we hide behind religion a lot of times and a lot of concepts. Religious beliefs was about maybe 44%. It was number 4, number 5 on the list of why things actually work in marriages. Yeah. So my feedback is, where, a lady believes more of, what my pastor says, or what my imam says, than what my husband says, to hell with that. Or where the man says, because my pastor says, whatever my wife says, that's total BS, as far as I'm concerned. And that is part of where the problem comes. Where the man now listens to the pastor or the imam or the religious leader more than he listens to the person in the house with him. It's a big cause of concern. And when we talk about pressure, we spoke about buckets and expectations, and I spoke earlier on about family expectations, societal expectations, individual expectations. I didn't mention religious expectations. It puts a lot of pressure on relationships and marriages. And while we think it helps to preserve marriages, I'd like to just drop this here, that a marriage that lasted 20 or 30 years isn't the same as the fact that marriage is actually working. The stuff where you're being held together by force, not because you want to, but because your religious belief says do it, or your families expect you to do it, that's a failed marriage. Even if you guys die together at 90, it's a failed marriage. You should be held together, want to be together, want to remain together because both of you want to. Not because your parents or your friends or your family or your church or your mosque. No, it shouldn't be that way. I just thought to drop that as a note. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Dapo. Ms. Sidibe, you have something to say.
I do, actually. I really like what he said, because I believe that the foundation of a lasting marriage is friendship. And I don't think enough emphasis is placed on friendship. We think it's the romantic love. I love this person. I think about you all the time. I can't live without you. But it isn't, because that sort of fades over time. It takes a back seat to genuine friendship. And I can speak to that because I've been married for a very long time. And I know that the foundation of my marriage is friendship. My husband and I are good friends. We talk about things. And I think that when you have friendship, you may not need a retreat to have a conversation about certain things, because you will talk about those things as a matter of course. And sometimes you might say, there's something I'd like to talk to you about, and then you get into it. But I think that Ikenna's points are very valid. I think it's just that sometimes people can't do the whole formal thing. We're not very good at communication, by the way, and especially things that are painful or hurtful. When somebody has hurt you, it's not very easy to say, oh, you hurt me. And I think it's something we all need to learn. If we want our marriages to last, we must learn the art of honesty about our emotions and about how we feel about things. We should also learn how to forgive, and how to stop going back to, when you did that to me, I left it, you've done it again. It makes no sense. You can't go forward when you're thinking of the past all the time, and past hurts. I think it's, as the marriage goes on, you're meant to understand each other better if you are forgiving and if you build on the friendship. So I actually think that friendship, and in the context that Dr. has discussed it, is critical, and Ikenna as well. It's critical to the survival of marriage.
Yes, it is. I thank you very much for that. That's the place of friendship in these relationships. Right now, really, we should actually be in question and answers. So please drop your questions on the chat box, and I would read them out. There are some comments here that I would read. Olisoyoli says that every marriage is unique, and partners come into marriage with certain perceptions with regards to roles and responsibilities. But I believe communication is key. Marriage is a partnership and not necessarily transactional. So that's a good point. Thank you very much, Olisa. I'll take questions. Are participants able to raise hands and ask questions, host? Okay, so I'll take any questions I see here. There's a question, and I think that's for you. It says that, that being said, should I marry? I guess that's what he's asking. Should I marry my childhood friend?
Why not? If you're really good friends, why not? Because the person has known you all this while and knows the difficult side of you as well as the pleasant side. And that's the thing with marriage. It's about not just seeing the best side of us. And sometimes in relationships, when you're courting, you show only your best side. And some people can keep it up for a long time. And then when they get married, they then all of a sudden show a different side. But sometimes also when you love people, you ignore the side they're showing you. Maya Angelou says, when a person tells you who they are, believe them. So when people are doing certain things, don't think that when you marry that you'll change them. You're not going to change them. So if you can accept what they're doing that you don't like, accept it and go ahead. But I think certainly a childhood friend is a good candidate for a good marriage.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I wanted to contribute to that.
Please do.
I definitely agree that your childhood friend can be a good candidate for marriage, but I feel like we need to also be careful, because I love some of what Dakwa said, in that we don't really discuss sexual fulfillment. And what if you're not attracted to your childhood friend? Because I've seen many people do that, make long-term commitments like that, and then basically you've married who is not your type, you don't like them. And that's why you're outside looking for your type while you're causing emotional abuse to somebody, your childhood friend that you've married, in the house. So I think that your friendship is definitely important, but I think sexual chemistry is also important.
Very important. Okay, so we don't take it for granted that we're a childhood friend doesn't mean that we are, completely aligned in other matters. Good point.
Let me just throw something in, Linda. Let me just throw something in.
Yes.
Supposing all you have with the person is sexual fulfillment, is that enough reason to go ahead? Because sometimes it depends. I think it depends on the value that people place on things. Different people place different values on things, so I think it's really difficult, to be honest. It's really the point to decide for anybody what it is that they should do. But whether or not it makes sense, it makes sense. But Arise's point is totally and absolutely valid. But people have to decide how much weight they put on the different things that are important to them. Remember, we talked about expectations when we started, and so you put different weights on different things, and then then you try to find a person who fits them. And sometimes you can't find a person who fits them. And that's why sometimes people, again, they say they haven't met the person. You know, these things are very complicated because, again, as Dakwa says, we're all different. And sometimes you can't find a person who is perfect in all those areas that you talk about, and you have to compromise on certain things.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Idigbe. We have a few questions here. I would request that you please keep your questions brief so we can go through them. Some of them are just comments. Latif, for example, says, believes that sometimes most marriage counselors use religious verses to counsel the couple, which doesn't think is very practical. He thinks marriage is more than religious. His question really was just asking because of what he sees happening. There are a few comments. I'm going to request that I flip through the comments and just go to the questions. Emmanuel Leko asked a question about how do you have a healthy conversation to avoid bitterness and grudge on the part of the man. There's a story before that, which I would try to go through. Anyway, the husband takes out a long-term loan of 2 million to offset the wife's debts. The repayment will affect the monthly allowance because of other deductions. Prior to taking out the loan, the husband had that conversation with the wife to the effect that regular monthly upkeep will be impacted and he may not be able to give the usual amount for upkeep. The wife agrees because the debts were suffocating her relationship with her husband. Barely 2 weeks into the new month after the husband has given her the money to offset the bills, she became upset, saying, "This was not how I envisioned my life, where I'll be the one taking up your role in providing for the family." So that's his question. How do you have healthy conversations to avoid bitterness and grudge on the part of the man? I'll take a few more questions, and then anyone who wants to respond to them would pick as I go through them. Okay, this is about recording. Yes, you can get the recorded version. Chikadli Spencer Obiona asked, she was the one I quoted earlier in the day, by the way. She says, what is your practical solution to a marriage glued together by societal expectations instead of friendship or love? And if I'm going to give that question to you, maybe you can respond to that and the previous one.
I was going to say that, I was going to say something that societal expectations, you see, there are people who believe in duty. The Queen, for example, believes in duty. And so it works for her. And so those who are held together by societal expectations are going down the road of duty rather than personal or individual what they want. And it's difficult to really decide for anybody. I cannot do duty, stay in a situation that is untenable because society says, but then that's me. And it takes a lot of courage to not do what society expects, but it's up to you. You know, it's your life. I always think I have one life. And whilst I'm willing to compromise on a number of things and do my own share of okay, let's leave this one. But at the end of the day, at the beginning, again, there was something that was said about the weighting of various expectations. When I've weighed it, if I'm going to die unhappy, then I'd rather leave and be unhappy and find my happiness. You know, so it's really difficult for different people. I can't be the queen because, you see, that duty comes before every other thing. And that sounds to me as if what the question is. So the adherence to society's values comes before every other thing. If that's how you are, then it'll work for you. It's fine, you know, for the two of you, if that's how the two of you are and you believe in it. However, it would appear that to even ask the question, maybe at some point, one of the partners begins to ask, is it enough? When you begin to ask yourself, is it enough? It's time to have a serious conversation. It's time to look at what you actually would like. It's time to look at whether it's working for you. And to make the point again about religious obligations, religion will tell you can't, you shouldn't divorce. But if you're going to stay unhappy, again, it's a choice you have to make by yourself. This bitterness one, to go to the first question, so that's what I'm going to say. I think it depends on you and your makeup, your mindset, your attitude, what you can take. If you're a duty person, you can stay there, and that's what it is. And that's how our parents were, duty, you stay there, you know. We are not like that. And our research generation, your generation, is all of you, the rest of you, is even less so than my generation. Now, bitterness. You know, when I started talking, I talked about autistic hostility. And if you think about what autism means, it's the idea you can't communicate effectively. And so autistic hostility is when you feel hostile and resentful about something, but you can't communicate it. It's very easy for us to talk about communication, but it's not very easy to communicate effectively. It takes practice. It's something you have to keep doing. And you see, all you can do, and one of the things I find is that it is the attitude of a person that will determine how much bitterness they want to hold. And so to that question, bitterness from a spouse, you can only do what you can do. You can have the conversation about it. How the person takes the conversation is a different thing entirely. Because you see, we all hear differently. What I say and what you hear that I said may be two different things. And so over the course of marriage, you learn to understand what each person is saying, what your spouse is saying. And so your spouse may be saying, I can't take it, this, I didn't expect to do this. And so, but what are they really saying? Is there some underlying thing that you need to find out? Maybe that's the front they're putting up to let you know that they're unhappy about something. So is it something that you need to interrogate? You know, and sometimes you don't think about these things, but I've learned that human beings don't always say the thing that they want to say. They say something and they hope that you will dig and find out what it is and peel back the layers. And so that communication requires a commitment to find out what the issues are and patience to do it. Marriage is for the long, it's a difficult thing. It's commitment.
Yeah. Can I quickly add something?
Yes, please, Ikenna.
So there's this concept. It's called, holding someone, what do you call it, emotional hostage. So essentially, where you're made to feel as if you're being held hostage emotionally. And one of the ways that they say that you can confront that, it really is, again, you have to use the right level of leading questions really to get to the bottom of it. I think that resentment, if it's allowed to build, can be very disastrous. And so we have to also be very perceptive about. So, for example, just imagine that you're walking along the way and then you mistakenly step on someone and the person starts to cross you for about 5 minutes. You will know that something is not right. That it's not just because you step on that person. Maybe they lost their job as they were leaving the building. And then you step on them and then they just go crazy 5 minutes. Right. So I think you have to also be perceptive and be have what they call awareness.
Yes.
Environmental awareness. Be aware. I think that's very key also to this type of discussion. And the truth is that it is difficult to again have a one-size-fits-all solution for everyone, because people are different. They come from different backgrounds. They have different expectations. So what is important is when you're getting into marriage, and I know that most of the audience here are really people who are already married, but it's important to understand the reason why you got into the marriage in the first place, right? And then allow yourself. I think we don't make enough allowances also. I mean, the word tolerance, we don't make enough allowances for people to make mistakes, because no one is perfect. People will make mistakes.
Yeah.
And so you need to also understand that you're going to be perfect. You can never be perfect. All the other things. I think that's what I want to train there. And then I know this is coming from the left field, but Linda, I think it's important also that we talk a little bit about sexual relationship, intimacy. What role does it play in the success of a marriage? I think it's something that we need to address.
Shoot.
So So I mean, I have this, funny thing that I was just thinking about it throughout yesterday that, men see sex as a way to relieve stress. A lot of women see sex as stress. So make sure, because, having sexual intimacy in a marriage is very important. And so for me, I think that, again, it's something that needs to be put on the table. Cannot be swept under the carpet. I don't know, our generation, I think we're in the middle, okay? In the middle between Mrs. Adibe's generation and the younger generation. I don't know if you get what I mean. And so we're learning actually how to talk about sex in marriage. It's no longer a taboo subject, but it's still something that you tread around carefully, and kind of tiptoe around a little bit, just trying to make sure that you don't hurt anyone's feelings, But I think it's something that we need to address, headlong, without equivocation, because it really leads to a lot of issues in marriages.
It does.
Yes. Yeah.
Can I just throw in a word?
Right.
Can I throw in a word to add to what you can have? You see, when you talk about sexual relationships, for women, affection is also important. And so a woman likes hand holding, she likes hugging. Those things are not sex, but they're important to her and her sense of well-being. And a lot of men are not very good with affection. And so when you're talking about sex, also let's talk about affection, because it's about the requirements of the two. And those things matter to us.
That's a very important, a very valid point you've made there, Mrs. Dibe. Thank you very much for that. And, I wish we had more time. We need a whole new webinar for that. It would have been a very good conversation here, putting that side by side with what Ikenna has said about sex in marriage. I honestly, it would have been a good conversation, just that we don't have all of that time here. But yes, there are conversations that should be had. I'm going to bring this question from Oli Herrera Longe to you. He says, how early in a relationship, that's before marriage, do you inquire about some of these expectations we are talking about for marriage, without it seeming like an interrogation or an interview? Because it might be a little odd, and I get where he's coming from. So you're all talking about having this conversation. When do you start it? How early do you have those conversations? That's all.
Okay, I'll be very short with that answer, which is it's never too early. It could be your very first date. Because that's something you need to put ahead. So I had a friend who had a problem with people who attended white garment churches. It was something he couldn't live with. So every first date, he would mention it. Oh, by the way, what church do you attend? And people thought that was a bit offensive. And I'm like, look, he knows himself. He has issues with white garment church people. So let him put it out there so that there aren't initial mismatched expectations, So if you want to talk about expectations, the earlier, the better. If the person takes offense, it's going to speak what I want to talk about later on, open-mindedness. If your partner isn't open-minded, then I think you should just forget it. Except, of course, you're also not open-minded, then it's fine. Otherwise, if you're going to interrogate me on the first date, shoot away. Tact is something you need to learn to ask questions without seeming very aggressive or seem like, you're going to war on your first date. But it's okay for this Q&A. Now, social media and the way we communicate has changed. So you can answer that head, oh, by the way, I was just reading up something about this. What's your take on X, Y, Z? As a way of bouncing off your expectation of your partner, okay, really, you have those conversations before your first date, before the first drink or the first ceremony together. You bounce them off him or her, and you understand how the person reasons. Can't I? Yes. But you need to also be witty about how to get the right answer.
Exactly. Exactly, Dapper, because sometimes it may really be odd, talking about certain things that early in the relationship. Particularly when it comes to money, how you make it or how you spend it.
It's so
or like
easy.
Ikenna was talking about sex in marriage. Yeah, don't you think?
Yeah. I can ask those questions. I like Arisa, for example. I'm like, oh, Arisa, we're just talking before the first date, and I'm like, oh, that, I'm just laughing here, just sort of joke. That, two people are fighting, complaining about how the woman and the man, and they've actually come and settle the issue. I don't even know what to advise them on. Not advising me. I'm like, oh, this is how I say. And then I come back home, my neighbors just, don't feel something from the neighbors. What happened? It's an issue about sex. The man said the woman likes sex too much, and it's become an issue. That beg, you come an advisor. Then if I just say that, but what's the woman's problem? Why does she like sex too much? I understand that I say has an issue in that space. Now, I just need to mention very quickly, Mrs. Digbe said, it's amazing how there's something called inception, I'm sure you're familiar with, where certain things are ingrained in our minds.
Yeah.
LTM, and it's so ingrained that sometimes we don't even understand how strong these mindsets are, no matter how young or old or open-minded you are. So we spoke about how women, are big on affection, they like holding hands. That is an ingrained perception of how women I've met women who totally don't like you showing affection. They just want to laugh a bit, smile a bit, sleep. Don't spoon me, don't hold me while I'm sleeping. Some women are like that, and some men are big on showing affection. We've all seen Big Brother, although it was all over the place. Some people have, insulted him for being too, gumbody-ish. But that's what some people are. Okay, so I think it varies from person to person. And
that's true.
Meant to be affectionate or not be, but you should negotiate and agree ahead of time.
Ahead of time, okay.
You're going to say something?
No, go ahead. Are you done?
I was going to say something.
I think the only thing I wanted to say was I love what your approach to that. And I think that we also learn a lot from people's stories. So in dating people, you're having conversations, they're sharing their history, they're telling you how they handle things at the office. And we learn a lot from how people make decisions outside of us. So I think that that's another way that we get an understanding of how people make decisions when it comes to money, when it comes to love, when it comes to sex.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I agree. And you can really ask those questions without asking them. You just learn them from get to know more about that person from the kind of conversations that you are having. But as we're speaking, really, depending on how important the matter is, it may be important to shoot, straight up. Some people are just straight shooters, so they go for it and ask those questions. I had a friend, I still have that friend. She has sickle cell anemia. And I remember her saying that back in school, just because she didn't want to take any risk of it developing into love and we don't know what to do with it, that from the very first day when you say hello to her and you're of the other gender, the next question is, what's your genotype? It was so important to her because she didn't want to get into that a relationship with that person, and it's difficult to pull apart and all of those things. And then she has kids who also are going through what she's going through. But yeah. Dr. Thank you very much. I agree. You should ask from day one. I think that answers that question right there. We should actually be wrapping up now. Let me see if there's any quick question. There are quite a number of comments I want to look for specific questions. How have we renegotiating marriage? Let's see. The decision can... Yeah, okay. Hello, can you still hear me, Mrs. Idigbe?
Yes.
Somebody is asking
I can hear you.
Can have a part 2 of this webinar.
We'll bear it in mind and then put the word out.
Okay.
We'll put the word out because I do think it's an important subject. But the thing with these things is that you can never really say everything because there's so many different perspectives and so many layers that's, with all these sorts of conversations.
Okay. Yes, you're right. I don't think we can actually ever finish this conversation on gender roles and the revolution that is going, given that some of us are still a bit far behind. And when we are talking, the other time we were talking about men's contribution to domestic tasks and everything and the care work, it may never match what the women are doing in the paid work, in their careers. And so these discussions will continue, and these expectations will continue to change. So I'm going to go around now and give each of the panelists just a minute to wrap up. Any other thing that came to mind as we are having the conversations, or what you wanted to talk about that you haven't had the chance to? Mrs. Digwe, just because I can see you right here, I'm going to let you go first.
Okay.
Just sort of closing remarks.
Okay. What I have to say is I've been married for 37 years, and I would like to believe that it's been a reasonably successful marriage. And what I find is that sometimes you can't get everything you want, but if you have friendship and you have love, that kind of deep love, you can get over things, and there will be challenges, but you can get over those challenges, because you have conversations, and you know that you can't always win a situation. You're able to forgive, to let it go, to win some and lose some. And that's what is important, which means that for every day you're married, you're negotiating something. As you change, your marriage will change, your spouse will change. And each time you don't realize it, but renegotiating. And so don't be afraid of any human relationship. We're talking about marriage today. Maintain the relationship. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Idigbe. Arese, you are up next. And after that, Dapo.
Okay, I just wanted to say that in my own, obviously I'm divorced. When I think about, marriage and going into a marriage again, I like to think about it from the point of view of how I deal with my long-term friends. So I have friends that I've been friends with for over 20 years. And what I find is, and I feel like people can take this and apply it in their marriages as well. If we make decisions from a place of love, if when someone offends us, we think about the fact that, is this person coming from a negative place? Like, do they mean me harm, or do they have good intentions, right? If we remember that this person is not my enemy, I feel like it's easier to handle conflicts within marriages like that. So when we're making decisions from a place of love, when we're trying to be understanding of the fact that we're not perfect, so we can't expect other people to be perfect. And even when we have disagreements, learning that it's not that you're not going to fight, it's about how you fight. It's about learning to communicate. With a lot of my friends, I know what their triggers are when we're in an argument. And I know if I say this thing, it goes from 0 to nuclear. But over the years, you kind of learn how to sort of like navigate those things and fight fair. And I think, it's something that we can definitely apply to marriages. And then I wanted to say something else about something that Ikenna said around the fact that women, or the fact that the sacrifices that men and women make, and consequences for these things. And I find that maybe I'm biased, but in Nigeria, the women are held more accountable. So when we say that when we say things like be understanding, be forgiving, be tolerant, I find that as a society we have that expectation of forgiveness and understanding when a man does something wrong, and the woman is expected to be understanding. But when a woman does something wrong, society and people, women, men, other people, they don't have that same expectation of understanding for the woman, but they expect her to have it. So for example, when it comes to things like infidelity, if a man cheats, the notion is, you the first. Men are not, men, do it all the time. So you should be understanding, of it. But no, I've never seen a situation where they've told a man to be understanding of the fact that his wife cheated. So I feel like these are things that we, like Mrs. Igwe said, we are the society. So when we say society says, I think it's important for us to go away, like making these changes in our own mindsets as individuals, because we are the society.
All right. Thank you very much, Arese. Thank you for those comments. Dapo.
Okay, so I took a couple of notes, so I wouldn't interrupt the meeting or the session. So I'll run pretty fast. I don't take much more of the time. One, open-mindedness is something I think is missing in relationships in Nigeria. And not just in relationships, in everything we do, how we work with our colleagues, our peers, our friends, our family. If we don't introduce the idea of open-mindedness to the marriage institution, then it's really a waste of time on one side. On the other side, the marriage institution, as we know, is thousands of years old. The way we eat, our diet, it's changed over the last 20 to 30 years. The way we communicate has changed over the last 20, 30 years. So I think the institution of marriage itself needs to change. Marriages of 1,000 years ago, the way it was structured between man and woman, the natural relationships, we can't apply that to 2020 or 2021. It's totally wrong. The way we dress has changed. The way the hairstyle has changed. Skin care has changed. Why should how marriages work? Why shouldn't it change also? There's a concept I came across. It's called LAT. It's called living apart together. For certain couples, the only way it can work is for you guys to actually live apart. I know a couple, Lekki phase one, they live on the same street. The man has his own house, the woman has her own house. The marriage is now 11 years old. It seems to be working. For some, that's what you need. And for some people, you need to be in each other's space every day. So marriages work when you're not butting heads every day. Half the time, the man is always in her house anyway. But that concept of space, personal space, is very, very critical. Also, I'd like to mention that, I mentioned this previously, but not in full detail, that a lot of times we want to project our individual selves, we want to project our individual ideas on the other person. It's a form of bullying, domestic bullying of sorts. Sometimes the man, sometimes the woman. And then part of what we need to renegotiate is the idea of people being able to live their full independent lives whilst enjoying each other when they can. The moment the man can live his independent life and she can also live hers, there's already a conflict. It means one person is managing for the other person. It's something's going to blow eventually. Also, very quickly, apart from taking your time, is when we talk about marriages changing, people living their full independent lives, we need to be able to negotiate. Obina spoke about sacrifice. Mr. A went to do his master, then he will come back and should go do it. I want us to understand that we don't know when the man is going to die or when the woman is going to die. So when the woman puts her own aspirations and goals, and dreams on hold as a sacrifice so that he can live his dreams and goals, and when he's done, she can do. What if he dies, year 4 into that exchange? She's lost 4 years of her life. So while we plan and we pray that, we get preserved to live long, I think we also need to live our lives now. So while you're making those sacrifices, you need to learn to live in the interim. And the final point on that is, I think when you talk about negotiating marriages, I've had a concept for a long while now. I'm lucky it's a concept I'm now able to practice. Couples need to renegotiate their marriages, have a marriage review, if you want to call it that, every 2 years or every 3 years. Because expectations change. What you think you want and need at this point in time when you're 25 or 20 or 28 could change when you're 35. So every 2 years, every 3 years, whatever works well for you, sit down and say, look, I have new expectations. Let's talk about them. Let's negotiate. Because certain things that mattered 5 years ago no longer matter. Certain that were really important are no longer important. Then final, apologies once again, is about rules. We need to start making our own rules. This rule of, the concept of religion, the concept of, colonialism, the concept of our ancestors, how do we not measure ourselves against the standards of other peoples or other cultures or other religions that aren't compatible with our individual, rules or beliefs or expectations? It's very, very critical we separate those things. Otherwise, it's just, it's a roundabout game that doesn't move us.
Around in circles.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dapo. Dapo, you have very interesting views about some of these matters. Thank you for sharing them. Thanks. Sikena, I will come to you now. Hello, Ikena, did we lose you?
No, he's still here.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here. I
we're trying to
was
wrap
on
up.
mute.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll try to keep this very brief. I think for me, I wanted to close really by talking about outside influence and I think that was alluded to it a little bit towards the end of this summary. And we not comparing ourselves to other people, I think is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Mr. A just bought a car for his wife. When is Brown going to come? Oh, Mrs. B just did this, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, the role of social media and all of those things, where, you know, we're looking at social media, we're looking at people, and we're following their lives, and then, you know, we're comparing on a daily basis how, you know, this person is living a spectacular life, and why is my life the way it is? When we know that most of those things are not reality, right? So I think in this in this modern age, the effects of things like social media outside are looming larger than life. And we need to acknowledge this, and also have the conversation.
I don't know if it's from my end or Ikena's end. I seem to have lost him.
Mm-hmm.
Can anybody hear me?
No.
We can hear you. Kenna seems frozen.
Oh, okay. Iken, I don't know if you can hear us. We lost you about 10 seconds ago.
We need to do as a couple, as a married couple, and keep our feet on the ground. Make sure what other people are doing, not understanding that they just say, oh, we want to copy because this person did this. I mean, style. Okay? I can hear you. I can hear you. Hear me?
Oh, we can hear you now. Yes, please go ahead. Please go ahead. Yes.
Okay, I don't know what happened. What was last thing you heard me say?
No, it was frozen for a few seconds, but go ahead. We started hearing you some 5 or 10 seconds ago. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so I was just talking about, you know, we making sure that we're not. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're talking about we making sure what? Yes.
Okay, so I was talking about we making sure that we don't allow ourselves to be over-influenced by outside events. So, and I mentioned social media, and you know, Instagram and whatnot, and how people increasingly are living their lives based on what they see on social media, and forgetting about the realities that they have, to live with on a daily basis. And just to quickly say something about when we talk about having love in a relationship, it's all encompassing. So it's not just about, if you look at the definition of love, it's not just about, again, erotic love. It's also about charity. It's also about dedicating yourselves to others, okay, to your spouse, to your children, to the family. And so you cannot really take away the role that love plays in a relationship, because without that love, I'm not sure what the two of you are doing together, right?
Yes.
It's what you do and how you view that love. I think that's what's very key. Love is not something that makes you suffocate the other. It's something that makes you allow the other to breathe, to be.
Yes.
And so there was something that was said about people living apart in a marriage. I'm sorry, I disagree with that. I don't know how people can live on the same street in different houses and say they are married. I completely disagree with that.
Maybe we can engage Dapo after the session to understand it. I'm also interested in hearing.
One word, open-mindedness.
Open-mindedness.
Let's stop
we'll talk about it some more offline.
Living together, yeah, which I'm good with, by the way. That concept was handed down to us. It wasn't something your parents manufactured or your grandparents manufactured. It's something that was sold to you and you have bought it. If someone else...
Okay, Dapo, Dakwa, can I request that we take the rest of this offline? If you can wrap up, please, so we can.
So yes, yeah. So well, you see, that's what we're talking about, communication in relationships. So you have to allow me to communicate. Finish my communication. Anyway, I think I'll leave it at that, because I think we have spent a lot of time already. So let me just leave it at that. I think and close by saying that we should not allow our marriages to be influenced by external factors. Yes.
Exactly.
Can I just throw in
Yeah. Thank you.
Linda, can I just throw in one last thing? Sorry, can I just throw in one last thing? I wanted to say that, and when we're married, when you have children and you're all engaged in raising children, somehow the focus sometimes is removed from the couple. You need to find a way to maintain a little focus on yourselves, because I just think we each have different lives. And I think it's again something that I alluded to at the beginning. Your life with your husband and your children, your life with your children, different pockets. And at some point, the children will leave. And so you have to maintain a relationship with your spouse whilst you're raising children, because that empty nest, there's always a crisis. It's crisis time in a lot of marriages when the children have left the house. And I just want to say, think about it. Empty nest. Think about Omuga. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mrs. Sidibe. I'll just conclude by saying, from what we've all gathered and what we know, is that none of us is perfect. We have our positive parts, we have our negative parts. And because of all of these changes we are talking about, this further, sort of complicates the entire, positivity and negativity thing. So just to reference an article I ran into recently, it's by Sarah Schwartz. She's a clinical psychologist. She was advising or explaining to couples on the importance of focusing on the positive parts of their partner, because that way couples become stronger and more in tune with each other. Because what's happening is that, as human beings, and that's the way we are wired, we are wired when you come into a situation or into an environment to look for what is wrong or what is broken or what is dangerous, just so that you can avoid it. That's just us. So, but when we're in a relationship like we're talking about, it's the opposite that we have to do. That's what is healthy. So if you are constantly focusing on what is wrong with your partner, you're going to feel less connected. You're going to dislike that partner. As my friend Bolua says, she says, marriage is simply saying and knowing that I may not like my husband every day, but I choose to love him for always. And I think what we need for a happy or long-term relationship is to override this natural tendency to look for what is wrong. For marriage, you have to work at it. It doesn't come naturally. You just have to work at it. And to get it right, each party must focus on the positive parts of the other. That way, the couples, we believe, will become stronger and more in tune with each other. On this note, I want to say thank you very much to everyone, our panelists, the audience. Thank you for joining us. This was really very good. We're going to make it, but thank you for joining us, and we'll let you know and give you feedback on part 2 if you're able to do that. Thank you. And God bless.